In 2007 or 2008, I was browsing the clearance rack at my local Walmart and happened to see True Crime New York City sitting on a shelf with a $10 price tag attached. Previously, I had no interest in ever owning or playing this game, but for $10, I decided, what the heck, I can probably get $10 worth of enjoyment out of this QU quote-unquote GTA clone. I had previously played a little portion of True Crime Streets of LA at a friend's house, and I was rather underwhelmed by it at the time. I know the game still has a cult following amongst its fans, but even going back to play it for this footage, it feels a little janky and glitchy overall, and the mechanics don't feel fleshed out as far as they should have been. The episodic nature of the missions also feels a little bit out of place in a sandbox game. Yes, I'm going to use the older term sandbox game instead of open world game, which sounds so boring as we used to use sandbox game in parallel to GTA style games. When I finally got to playing True Crime New York City, I was actually taken aback at how good the mechanics in the game were. Many of the mechanics in the game, like the hand-to-hand fighting and the aiming and shooting, feel better to use in this game than even San Andreas. There are also a lot of other additions to the game that I really enjoyed. While, like the previously mentioned San Andreas, you can buy clothes and a new haircut for your character, you can also go to a dojo and buy new fighting techniques to switch to, on the fly for example. You can switch from brawler to taekwondo to karate mid-fight. On the fly, you can also use your in-game cash earnings to buy new cars, new driving techniques, new guns, and even new songs for the game's excellent soundtrack, which consists of licensed music, which I had to mute for this footage. Obviously, top that off with the fact that almost any door to any store, hotel, or apartment complex can be entered in the game. And you have a game that feels incredibly expansive, considering the hardware it runs on, while being able to walk into random buildings. And a large sandbox-style game might not seem like a big deal in the modern age. Even with the game only using a couple of different templates to simulate the inside of the buildings. This was an incredibly impressive feat on the PS2, GameCube and Xbox for sandbox-style games. Being able to walk into any open store in the game really helps bring New York City to life in this game. It's a small touch, but it adds an extra layer of interactivity and exploration to the city. I remember being blown away by the fact that you could enter a large percentage of the buildings in the game. I thought it was an awesome design idea, especially since I was used to buildings and doors mostly being there for decoration in other sandbox games of the generation, I would say. However, my favourite mechanic is the random active crimes carried over from the original True Crime. Marcus is constantly being notified of various crimes being committed in his vicinity. You can either choose to engage in stopping the ongoing crimes, either arresting or killing the perpetrators as needed, or just completely ignoring the calls. This is one of my favourite design ideas instituted in the game because it gives the player something engaging to do in the times in between missions. The crimes vary in variety, from stopping a domestic disturbance, a bomb threat, a carjacking, and many, many more, in fact. The crimes at first have a good variety to them. Eventually they do start to repeat over and over, but at first they feel quite varied later. When I finally played Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered on the PC, I realized that Spider-Man used a similar city crime system in its design, where Spider-Man would intercept police chatter about active crimes being committed in the area, and players would choose to respond to calls or ignore them. I know Spider-Man 2 on the PAs. 2 had a similar system, but I've still yet to play Spider-Man 2 on the PS. 2, even though I've owned it for years, for me, when I first saw Spider-Man's active crime system, it was a callback to True Crime. In my mind, it's an ingenious design idea that helps bring the crime-fighting portion of each game to life and gives the city more life, feeling less static and lifeless as a whole in each game. True Crime New York City follows the story of Marcus Reed, the son of a New York crime kingpin, who, as the manual states, after a life of hard crime, has turned to law enforcement, only to watch his mentor die in front of his eyes. Marcus is now drawn into a story of deception, conspiracy, and double crossings, coming soon to a theatre near you. Oh, sorry, the introduction mission of the game introduces a young Marcus, while he was still in his life of crime, taking revenge for an attempt on his father and his lives. After that, the timeline shifts forward 5 years, where Marcus is now a police officer who is about to be promoted to the organized crime unit. The game sets up the story and has a quick force training mode that does a good job of teaching the basic combat and driving mechanics. Normally, force training modes annoy me to no end, but this one isn't too bad. As far as training modes go, I still hate them. I hate them. I hate them. There are quite a few complex mechanics to the fighting and gunplay in particular, but the training goes by pretty quickly overall. I still hate force training modes. I hate them. And I prefer the good old days where there was an option on the title menu to either do the training or not. It was up to you. But overall, this one isn't that bad. I found that whenever I play this game, my usual GTA urge to go on crazy rampages isn't there. True crime is actually kind of unique in that you play as a cop. I mean, I guess it's not overly unique. There was Driver in games like that. However, you can certainly go on rampages if you choose to do so. But the game does punish you for doing it. Players can even choose to play the game as either a good cop or bad cop. If they choosing to do things like sell any crime evidence they acquire at the local pawn shops for cash. Instead of turning them in at the station for career points, you can extort local store clerks for cash, or just shoot every perpetrator when responding to crimes. If you choose to do so, the game grades you. With good cop points and bad cop points throughout in the game, you can stop and frisk any of the NPC characters you want searching for drugs, weapons, and etc. This brings up another addictive mechanic in the game. The more pedestrians you arrest who are carrying these items, the more the crime rate goes down in each neighborhood. When you get the crime rate down enough in each neighborhood, stores that were previously barred up are now reopened, as they were forced to close because of the high crime rate. There's also a lot less trash and debris floating around in these neighborhoods. Whenever you lower the crime rate, I found myself kind of addicted to cleaning up each neighborhood, plus the stop and frisk feature allows me to be evil in other ways. Besides going on rampages, I like to stop and frisk random pedestrians, hit them once, and then let them go. If they turn to fight me, I beat them down, then arrest them for assaulting a police officer. See, there are other ways to be an evil a-hole in this game that aren't rampage sparray. I also like to randomly walk up to NPCs, punch them, and see if they're going to attack me, then I arrest them for doing it. It's my own way of being diabolical in this game. Granted, most of them pull out tasers to tase you with for attacking them, but I still find ways to skirt the rules and be evil in this game. I also like other small touches in the game, like since Marcus is an undercover C and in Street Kilo, if he is shooting or openly carrying a gun, he has to identify himself as a cop to other police officers, so they won't attack him. You can also randomly search trunks of parked vehicles for contraband. If you want, there's a lot of small details and quirks in the game's design that combine to add extra layers of immersion to the game. Luxoflux, the developer behind games like Vigilante 8, really thought outside the box in this game. And there are tons of seemingly small design choices that, when added together, give this game its own unique feel. It wouldn't be nearly as good without them. The main story missions can be beaten in 7 hours or less. I didn't really time it this run, but it is relatively short for a sandbox game. One thing I did notice in this run is that there aren't a lot of timed driving missions in the main story mode. There are a couple of scenes here and there, but to be honest, I didn't really miss the driver or Smugger's Run style missions. There are still a couple, but the game focuses more on the parts it excels at. And that's the hand-to-hand combat and gunplay elements. Coming back to the hand-to-hand combat in the game feels rather clunky. If you're used to more fluid fighting systems, the hit detection feels off. And it's best not to bother with the lock-on system for Hand 2, and for the time its combat was impressive for a GTA clone, it had a lot more depth to it than the hand toe and combat in the GTA games coming back. Now, it might feel janky to most modern gamers, but it still mostly works. Well enough, the gunplay also feels better here than in GTA, outside of the clunky weapon switching interface on the D-pad. However, unlike San Andreas, where you have to hold down the lock-on button to get dual-stick aiming, True Crime has dual-stick aiming by default. You can also lock onto enemies for fast targeting again, compared to the fluidity of modern games. Certain aspects of the combat and gunplay will feel janky, but compared to its contemporaries, there was a lot more depth to True Crime's fighting system than even the GTA series of the day. The driving in the game is alright, the physics engine does a decent job, the